All right, we are here with Ian Lieberman, director of the general managers. Ian Lieberman's been training since 2006. He's been a black belt since for 10 years. Actually, we got ours together after a trip to Hawaii with sunburns on our back. A little unknown fact, or maybe people know this: Ian is a no-gi world champion at blue belt in the IBJJF. So he actually he is a world champion at one of the belts, an adult. Uh,
Wow.
Big deal. Really, he's a big deal right here. Ian has a really hard job at
Yeah.
Easton, and Ian's kind of path at Easton was, other than he started training here, which we'll get into, he became an intro instructor, and then he became a noontime coach in Boulder. And then he moved into Denver as the general manager and took over as the head advanced ski coach, and eventually moved into director of general managers. And now he is an owner at Easton as well. So there is his path. So Ian, let's jump right into what brought you to Easton.
I think a few things. Well, first of all, it was luck, and I do think it was mainly luck that I lived in Boulder and I was, just sort of finishing up at CU. And yeah, I used to live close to it, so I would go to King Soopers and then I would see it. And this is back when Boulder was like in that little strip mall. And I would pass it. And I had so I'd pass it going home, and I had just kind of started. I'd watched the UFC here and there. It wasn't nearly as popular as it is today, and it was something I was always kind of afraid of. Like I had a visceral sort of reaction to it. And but every time I'd drive by, I'd like kind of peer in, and I just one day gathered the courage to walk in and see what it was about. And that's how it was really fortuitous and also just dumb luck, you know.
I was I think Ian and I came to Boulder around the same time, and for years until Ian brought me into Easton after we met, I used to see the Easton logo like at the bars when I was out partying, and I'd be like, man, that guy is so cool when he had an Easton T-shirt on. And I used to meet people that trained at Easton, and I'm like, oh, you train at Easton? You do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? And I remember just being just a total fanboy, which is not really me, but something about the jiu-jitsu I was a really big fanboy of it. And I was like, wow, these guys are badasses. I want to be like them, but I was so scared of going in and doing it. So, because I got in fights all the time, but I was like, I had an ego. So I remember that particular Easton logo was so uh, mystical to me. Like it was like magic. And I have this like crazy nostalgia when I think about those times, about how much that logo meant to me before I was part of Easton. So it's pretty crazy. Uh,
Yeah.
Ian brought me into jiu-jitsu, by the way. I think we've talked about that a bunch, but yeah, Ian is the one that introduced me to jiu-jitsu. After training for like, I don't know, 6 months or so, he brought me in. Um, so thanks, dude. I appreciate you.
Well, I was a walking billboard, I feel like, for that play, for Easton. Like, I mean, I still am, but now I'm in Easton all the time. So the people who I'm, raving about it to are they're like, all right, dude, I get it. I'm here, I'm here. But before I was at Easton full time when I had other jobs, like it's all I would talk about. But um, yeah, like I always attribute, and this is why, like, I think the job I get to do at Easton is so important to me is like I do think I do really attribute it to getting lucky, because if I had walked in there, and I always talk about Finney McMahon and Elliot and Nick and all the guys who kind of who were there all the time, if they hadn't been as nice to me and made me feel as like, man, they made me feel like I really mattered when I walked in those doors. If that hadn't happened, I probably wouldn't have done it. I was kind of, I think a lot of people when they join Easton or any jiu-jitsu school or any Muay Thai school or any, it's intimidating. I think they're almost looking for a reason to not do it, just to check a box. It's like I tried it, wasn't for me, and then they move on. And so it's like really important that when I think to all of us that when people walk in our doors that we show them immediately that they can do it and that they're a part of the team. And that's something I really remember. Like that's why I felt lucky, because it could have been, Finney was the first guy I saw, and he was so like warm and welcoming and just generous, and then he was also a badass, and it was like the combination of those two things that made me like immediately attracted to jiu-jitsu. I was like, I want to be like that guy. I always say like he was having like and I'll never forget this. Like he was back in the day, like the intros were a little bit different, and so we were like rolling like day one, and he, in the sense that you weren't allowed to train day one, but the intro, like he was definitely like, manhandling me a little bit. And he was having a full conversation with his like wife, who happens to be like this, really pretty, like she's also a badass black belt. But I just remember like looking over while he was just having like this casual conversation with her, while he was just completely controlling me, and I was like, I
He's a
want to be like
smaller
this
guy.
guy,
He's like
and
5'7".
yeah, he's a smaller guy, and he's like super friendly and like cordial. And I was like, this dude, this is, if like the first, when you first train with a jujitsu, like when you haven't done jujitsu, and you first would train with someone who has, and especially if they're like a purple belt and up, it's like a train, it's like you're encountering an alien. You have no idea what's happening, and it was like a really cool experience. But if I had walked in to somewhere else and they had just beat me up and not been nice to me, I would have come back,
Yeah, I think that's
gone
the thing
to
that people miss. They think they.
badminton or something.
I don't know if this is true. I was lucky enough to step into Easton as well, and you came to my first class with me because I was so scared, and I didn't need to be. Mike, who taught my intro, was great. Whoever taught my class, I think was Nick Klein, was amazing. Chris Klein sold the membership to me, and I was sold like immediately. But I remember same thing. I was so worried that it was going to be about getting beat up, but Amal made a point to change that, like get rid of that ego to let more people do it. And it's still going to be hard, but we don't have to make it hard at the beginning. We can make it easy at the beginning, and we can show them how hard it is on the mat later. Let's make this. That's why we call it an intro. That's why intros are so important. Really, that one-on-one moment to connect with the individual is just key. I think about that a
Yeah,
lot. But how scared I was, and I didn't need to be. I
which
remember
is so
you.
crazy. And also,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead. There's a little bit of lag, so if it feels like I'm interrupting you, I apologize.
No, please go ahead. Speak.
I was just gonna say, for you to be afraid, right? This is just something that like is important to point out. Like I think that's like a super cool thing to admit, like that vulnerability. But like you were like a very accomplished wrestler, and you've always been just like sort of a monster, and you're afraid, So I always think about how other people who don't have that background, right? Who it's like it's got to be even more scary, So I think that's just like a really important point to kind of flag, or to put a flag into. It's like you were afraid, and that I think says a lot. And I think it's cool that you can admit that, because I was too. I was petrified, and I always think about how somebody else who doesn't have an athletic background, who didn't wrestle, it's got to be even more intimidating.
I think a lot of it was for me was the ego, which is still what I struggle with. Like I don't mind getting beat up.
Sure.
Like not that it happened a lot growing up, but I've been beat up. I've been, when I was with older wrestlers, they beat the. I remember getting knocked out by one of them in high school. It was on my team because we were drunk and he got mad at me, and knocked me out. I was like, oh shit! And then it happened again a couple years later, and feeling very weak at that moment. Like man, I thought we were friends. I'm still nobody. They can still beat me up at will. And that drove me for a long time to continue to like wanting to fight and get tougher because I didn't want to be weak anymore. Um, but like I think when I came to Colorado, like I was drinking and partying a lot. I was getting in a lot of trouble all through fighting. But it was like drunk fights, There's no consequences. You don't feel anything. I mean, you get arrested and go to jail, but it was more like even if you did get beat up, it was like a brawl, so it didn't matter. But to have that moment of complete sobriety, walking into a room with bright lights, where and it's a business,
Mhm.
and it really show, at least for me, like will be the measure of who I am. I'm gonna go in there, and these people can beat me up, and my whole entire reality is popped. That bubble is gone. I'm not some tough badass. And I think for me, that was a big part of it. For me, like man, I have to go in there and show that I'm not tough. Like I have to go in there and admit that all these people can just destroy me, and I'm not this thing in my head that I've manufactured, you know. And I think having that
Yeah.
ego pop, which I knew was coming, like I had accepted it, was so scary because it was like my whole identity, and having to just shed that identity was just. I remember being so afraid of it. So that was
Yeah,
the fear
I
for
think that's
me.
really, Yeah, well, that's really it's interesting because and I think obviously you see this all the time. We've both been doing this for almost 20 years, but the amount of people that have come in that have been physical, like just beasts, you know, and you can tell that they have an ego. They don't make it because they can't let it go. And I love what you said about shedding identity because that's one thing jujitsu just is like I guess life is this way in general. It is, but jujitsu is like a really good microcosm of it. It's like you never get to. It's not like you're just it's constantly having to grapple. I mean, well, it wasn't meant to be a pun, but constantly having to like contend with the fact that you're not, that every time you step on the mat, like just because you did really well the last round doesn't mean you're going to do well this round, and you can have a great round and then the next person you get destroyed by. And that is, that goes with like you can have a really strong run at blue belt and then do nothing at purple belt, right? And it's just this constant process of getting humbled. As you brought up my blue belt championship, that's the only thing that I ever really accomplished. From a winning a tournament, like a big tournament standpoint. And yeah, it's just it's now I'm a black belt and I'm struggling. There are blue belts and purple belts who I struggle with, and that's like, so it's just this constant having to be force fed humble pie. And I think a lot of people that get started can't hack it, you know what I mean? And they quit because of it. They've been good at everything they've done up until that point. And then they start losing immediately and it's too painful to deal with having that sort of false, that manifest, that sort of ID or identify that the way they have identified themselves gets like crushed and they can't deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And it's much easier to speak. We're in our 40s now. We've been doing this since our early 20s. We've watched the company, it's not different. We just watch it shape over the years and been a part of it. And I think we go through these ebbs and flows and waves of, being good at the sport, being very into it, and then waves where we don't do a lot of it. But I don't know where I'm going with that. I think this, and you still battle with the ego. Like I still on the mats today, I still battle with, like when I think about competition, I'm competing right now and I'm in 12 years. When I was like my first match, or I did my first match in Houston, and then I sat down afterwards and I'm sitting there. I'm like, I fucking hate competing. Like I hate it, and then I sat there on the ground before my next match. I'm like, well, which when I was 25 competing, I couldn't have done this exercise, right? So I took a moment and I was like, well, Mike, what do you mean you hate it? Like I sat there and talked to myself, like what is it that you hate? Like what's going on here? And I like got it in my body. I'm like, okay, you don't like being tired. Like you have to work super hard and this other person's trying to beat you and you have to work hard the entire time. And it's so much easier to quit and let yourself lose. And that voice is constantly saying, quit, just give up. Who gives a fuck if you lose or not? And you're battling that voice and you hate that battle. Like I hate that battle, but I want to overcome it, but I hate it. It's like this. So, okay, I'm scared of that voice. I'm so scared of that voice because if I do submit to quitting, right, then I'm not good. Then I didn't give it my all and I'll walk away super upset. So I have to remind myself that. Then there's the piece that's, I don't want to lose because of my pride and ego. Like I'm a black belt. I've done this for a long time. And I put a lot of pressure on myself because I want to win and I want to win for other people too. And so I hate that pressure. It's like, oh, this is awful. People are watching me. I hate this so much. So then there's like, just the whole, am I going to gas out? I'm always worried if I'm going to gas out, which you self-impose all the time because you worry about gassing out. Your adrenaline builds more and you do gas out, right? So it's not that I hate the competition. I hate those pieces of it because, and really, yeah. If I look at what I really hate, it's not that I hate those things. I'm scared of those things happen. So then I go even deeper. I'm like, man, this is just fear. This isn't hatred. Like the deeper feeling is fear and anxiety. I have such a hard time with the anxiety and the fear drives that. And I'm like, well, I don't want to. And for me, like one thing I talk to my kids about a lot and at work is like, I don't want to do things. I don't want to not do things because I'm scared. So then when I can get to that point, I'm like, okay, so I don't hate this. I'm just scared. I'm just fucking scared. That's what this is. And it's like, okay, I need to go ahead and be scared. And then it just becomes easier. And then like positive self-talk gets me through it. But yeah, it's a lot of it is fear and anxiety that can drive us to not do things.
Yeah,
So
what's funny about you is like I would argue that, like, for you it's like that's you, maybe you hate it, but you're constantly pushing yourself to do it. And it's pretty cool. It's like you're doing all this running, and like I'm sure these longer runs like that, you start wanting to quit. I mean, I can imagine with a long run, like that voice in your head that's like, hey, you could just take it easy. You can slow down. Like just take a breather. Like that's just got to be the entire time. And that yeah, for me it was everything that you just said. And it was, because we were competing together for a long time, and it was all fear. And one of the things I always think about, you don't ever really I never got over the fear. I
I'm
never
not
got
over
over
it.
it. You just get more comfortable being afraid. No, you just get more comfortable being afraid. Like that is what you acclimate to. You're like, oh yeah, I'm afraid. And then you're just not, it doesn't have the same grip on you. But yeah, I was always afraid of losing, getting embarrassed, like all the things. And then sometimes you do lose and get embarrassed, right? Of course, that's the rub. Like the thing that you are afraid of most happens, right? And for me, like it happened at some random tournament in Houston, actually. um I lost before I stepped on the mat. Like I had like gotten to the finals with this kid. I remember this, and I was like, oh yeah, you know what? And that voice came in, and the voice was, you know what, dude, second is cool. Like that's a good, there's nothing wrong with that. Like this kid's good. You can take second. And I haven't even touched the kid yet. And that kid came out and beat the shit out of me, because I wasn't in the fight. And like what happened was he took my back, and then it hit me. Like I sobered up. I was like, what am I doing? And then I started fighting, but it was too late. And I was worried about doing that again for the rest of my competition career. I was like, am I going to break? Am I going to quit before it even happens? And before and like all of this, um, in my opinion, is why you compete. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, like that's really the reason. Like no one cares about the medals I mean, really no one does. Mike used to hang all of our medals in the bathroom. I like that's where they all were hung, was like above the toilet. It was like they might have even been in a box above the toilet. I mean, I remember you being like, we're not allowed out. This is where they all go, right? So no one cares about the medals, but it's like this. Yeah, competing is really good for finding out. It's like being honest with yourself, you know. And that's what it's good for. One of
Yeah.
the many things.
For me, it's that quit. And when I remember this week at IBJJF Denver Open, like I am not this high level intellectual when it comes to expressing like how to see competition, like to be inspiring through different words. For me, it's like everybody I saw that competed, I was like, listen, that fucking voice is gonna come tell you to quit. Tell that voice to fuck off, and I bet you can win. Right? That's your job right now. And that was my like speech to every single person that was about to get on the mat. Because like if you can tell that voice to fuck off, then you're gonna. That's like 80% of like if somebody's way beyond your skill level, but you're not a black belt yet, right? So you're not gonna really run into that. They should be around your skill level. They're around your weight. So tell that voice to fuck off and don't give up position. Just go, keep going because you can. Because you'll regret it so much if you do not. If you let it quit during that 5 to 8 to 10 minutes, you gotta suffer now. So afterwards, it's not as bad because that piece afterwards when you quit. Like I remember for me, the last time I competed before I got hurt
Oh,
was brown belt. I went out there with Brian Marizzi. I'd beaten him 3 times over the years. We came up forever. I used to beat his ass. And we got to the tournament and he immediately pulled guard. And I was like, I don't really care about this anymore. And he won up by a couple
I remember
points.
this
And I was like,
happening.
man, great match. I just didn't care. And that was the last time I competed because I got hurt shortly afterwards. And I was like, I don't care enough anymore. It's gone. And the drive was gone. And then this year, I was like, maybe it can be back. And it came through a different realm, not like ego as much as positive self-talk and mindfulness and understanding what I really want to accomplish. And going out to those finals matches, I'm like, I didn't allow that voice to second. I actually did best in both my finals matches because I was like, it was all positive self-talk. Like, I am meant to be here. They are scared of me. I'm in the finals too. I work just as hard as them. I can do my jujitsu. And and again, it's masters 3. Let's be really clear here. But I think it's important to remember, like, that positive self-talk versus the negative self-talk completely change the physiological. There's a physiological change in your body when you switch from the negative self-talk to the positive self-talk. And I think it's really important to do that. I know we're getting off the rails here from the questions I wanted to ask, but I think this is really interesting.
Oh, sorry.
Can I ask you?
Yeah,
Let's
well, yeah, sorry, yeah.
no add.
No, I was just gonna say, like, I loved I think what you just said is really important, and it's something that I remember reading about. And there's this book that I used to love. It's called Thinking Body, Dancing Mind. I used to read it all the time, and it
Remember,
talked about this a lot, and the way we both played sports growing up, and the way it was like, it was like it was all this negative self-talk to like basically push you. It'd be like, don't quit. You're a quitter. Don't be a quitter, right? That is like not. Instead of saying the opposite would be, champions never quit and you're a champion. Like, there is a huge difference in those two phrases. And you're right. It's like it has a totally different character, and you do have a physiological response to the positive self-talk. It's not like a cortisol dump. It's like, and it makes a big difference when you're competing. It makes a big difference when you're doing anything. I mean, the next time I remember, even when you're doing a workout that's really hard, when you start saying positive things, you feel different while you're thriving in the workout, instead of just beating yourself up and trying to convince yourself you're not a quitter. So it's just, no, I just thought that was a really, like, good insight. And if you're competing now, it's something you should look into, because it's a really easy. I feel like the negative self-talk is a really easy trap to fall into, and it's crushing.
it's the last personal story that I think I want to share on this because it was a moment for me. So I have an A/B test. I had the Houston Open, and then a month later I had the Denver Open. In the Houston Open, I went in the whole time like, I'm gonna lose to this guy. They're better than me, and and then during the match, I was like, I'm losing. I don't care. Whatever, they'll win. And then I was able to say, okay, Mike, you don't quit. And then I found that like little bit of pocket of strength to beat the person, like right at the end, right? And but it felt like pure luck, not like I was. It wasn't, and it wasn't fun. Like every match killed me. I was wrecked. I hated it. And then at the Denver Open, I've been listening to a bunch of mindful books on being an athlete, and then I've been listening to podcasts on it, as well as I moved into the day of the tournament, like do a lot of like motivational speaker, playlists that are all positive self talk. And I went into each match this time still scared shitless and anxiety ridden, but only saying positive things. And I don't think I broke a sweat in any of my matches. I had fun in all of them. I was a little scared at the beginning and rusty, but towards the end, I was like, I was energized. I wasn't worried about gassing out. I was like, I'm just going to do me and saying positive things to myself. And this tournament felt wildly different and fun versus Houston, which I was like, this was awful. So I don't know. I think there's really something to this, and I really implore anybody to talk about it. And I want to just ask Ian this question, which I'm going to ask a lot of people this: how important is competition to jiu-jitsu?
I think it's very important. I really do. I think it's important for a few reasons, but yes, I think it's very important. I think it's not even just to jujitsu. I think if you're doing, it's important to becoming a better person. I think it teaches you, everything that we've been talking about. And it does. The one thing it doesn't really, do is like measure. It doesn't really measure how good you are at jujitsu.
No,
Like
it
that's
doesn't.
not really the measure.
At the pro level, it
It's
does.
like,
But
and
adult black belt,
yeah, exactly. Like, once you've been doing it forever, yeah, at the highest level it does for
adult
sure.
black belt,
But
not masters.
I what I'll hear. Yeah, well, no, and Mike, like, so one thing I will say is, like, don't downplay that. Like, winning at Masters is actually, like, Masters looks different now than it did 20 years ago. Like,
It's
Masters 3 is like Marcelo Garcia. Okay, so it's like, I'm just saying, it's not. but that aside, one of the things that I think what it matters is that if you've been doing jujitsu for a really long time and you've competed and and you're an experienced competitor and you've gotten then when you go out and you lose to someone else even at Master 3, yes, it can be a skill thing, right? Because you've done this before. But what I see a lot is brand new people like white belts, blue belts competing for the first time, thinking that this is going to measure their jujitsu, and it's not. It's going to measure everything. Like it's going to measure your ability to deal with adrenaline dumps. It's going to measure your ability to perform under pressure. Like these are so you know the training room will more accurately measure the skill, your jiu-jitsu ability, right? Because you're comfortable there. You've been doing it for a while. You're not under the bright lights, right? It's dealing with the adrenaline dump, dealing with the people watching, the pressure, the fear of losing, all of those things. That's what you're going to be getting. You're going to be sort of confronting for the first time. So but I feel like that's really important, and nothing I've ever done. And I've done, I did do a lot of stuff. Like I played hockey pretty seriously. I never experienced anything like jiu-jitsu, like when I first competed. Like it was a totally foreign experience. Um, and I'm really glad I did it. I really am. It was a huge part, I think, of both of our jiu-jitsu upbringing. The other thing is if you do really want to be good at jiu-jitsu, it's good for that too, because you do train differently. Like there is no question when you're getting ready to compete, you train for it and you get, and so at the very least, one thing I always used to think about is like, even if I go out to this tournament and I lose, that's fine. I will have gotten better preparing for it. And I think it's very important. And I think everybody should do it. And I think it's easy, to your point, to lie to yourself. It's really easy to have a million excuses why you're not competing when you really, and it's like, look, if let's say that sometimes the excuses are valid, but you really got to look at yourself in the mirror, and the thing you got to really make sure is it's not fear. Because if it's fear, you need to do it. And for me, like when I was competing a ton, like it was fear. I didn't, and having you guys like really helped, because I couldn't just be like, you know what, I'm not doing this one, because I had other, Mike and others around me like, yeah, you are. What do you mean you're not doing it? Like that wasn't acceptable. And I think so having like you guys there we pushed each other, and that was awesome.
I want to kind of go into something here. So we've been around since 1998, right? And like obviously we came from a background of competitions. Like Elliot won Pan Am's at blue, purple, and brown. Amal competed since he was a white belt. Finney was competitive. We had MMA. Nick Klein was one of the best competitors, American competitors for a while. He just hated competing for the same reasons we hate it. And there was a bunch of competitors that came out of Easton. And I want to talk about one thing. We always say we're not a competition school, but I want to clarify something here. We say that because we want to be inclusive to everybody. And if people are injured, or they don't actually want to compete for like real reasons, that's totally fine. But there's no judgment on people that aren't competing, right? I want to be really clear about that. To an extent, if you're in your 20s, and you are doing jiu-jitsu and you actually want to be good at it, you should be competing, in my opinion. If you're when you get to your 30s and 40s, it's a little bit easier now because there's actually people to compete against that are your same age, that have the same responsibilities as you, that have the same life things as you. Like they're CEOs of companies with 3 kids. They like to go camping and they only train a few days a week. And you can find those people in the Masters 1 through Masters 7 at this point. So you can find people that are the same as you to compete against, which is great, which didn't exist a long time ago. But when you're in your 20s, right, you have a couple responsibilities that matter. Like one is the kids in their 20s are the ones that are going to help improve the jiu-jitsu. They're strong, they're hungry, they're young, they come back, they can fight and keep fighting. Even the teenagers, right? Because they can bounce back because they're young. And they're the ones that are going to go out there and have the ability to bounce back and keep competing and get our school better. So I am not just an advocate. I think everybody in their 20s, unless there's like some outstanding circumstance, like an injury or whatever, they should be competing. Now, if the excuse is that they don't have the money, man, I was working at a pizza shop, at a pizza shop, paying rent on my own, going to college, making $8 an hour, paying for jiu-jitsu and competing, traveling to California. And Amal told me, he's like, man, like you can't find $700. And it's really not that much more because I just went to Houston and I spent $700. It was $700 then and $700 now. Maybe $900 now if you really splurge. But like, I'd look at him in the eyes and I'd be like, no, I guess I could find it. And I just stopped drinking. I stopped buying coffees. I stopped going out to eat. I ate chicken and rice. And I was like, this is what I'm going to do. Amal said I could do it. I can do it. He's right. We can always find bullshit excuses not to do things. We can always find reasons not to do things. But if you actually care about getting better at jiu-jitsu, or really anything that you're practicing, imagine you play guitar. You just go ahead and play guitar on your own, whenever you want. But if you want to get really good, set up an open mic. You want to get really good? Have an open mic a few months out and say, I'm going to play open mic guitar. That will get a fire under your ass because you're going to be petrified to embarrass yourself in front of people, right? Like if you really want to get good at something, you got to put the pressure on a little bit. Or at least, even if you don't show up to that event, right? That pressure that knowing that something is coming really matters. That's why we set deadlines for things. It helps us execute. So I just want to say to everybody out there listening to this that's in their 20s, man, like you need to be competing. And if there's some circumstance that you think will stop you, talk to somebody who's older than you. Don't just make it up on your own or with your other 20-year-old friends, like reasons why you can't do it. Talk to a coach. Talk to somebody that's been there before. I also believe all our coaches should be competing. Every coach at all the Eastons, I think if they're like 35 and younger, should get out there and compete. I don't think there's any excuse not to. I feel firmly about that. Anybody that hears this podcast wants to reach out and talk to me about it, I am down. But this is important because we are battle-tested martial arts, and that's how we get better. And we bring and raise the level to everybody in the academies when we get out there and touch other jiu-jitsu and bring it back. And it gets you better, like Ian said. Like when you're competing for something, you have to train harder. You have to train smarter. You have to train stronger. You have to put yourself in serious pressure. You can't just play around. So that's my spiel on competition.
Yeah, I agree with every word of it, and I think that it's like you said, it's like we don't want, it's like we want people to feel included, but you should compete. Like it is compete, especially given the parameters that Mike laid out. If you're in your 20s or early 30s, like man, I think that everybody wants to compete. Like I think that everybody secretly wants to get out there and compete, but they're too afraid to do it. Right. And so it's a challenge. And it's a challenge that I think needs to be that we're laying out there. It's like get over your fear and do it. Right. And just get comfortable with the idea that you're going to have to do it probably a bunch, to get comfortable. But it's worth doing. It's one of the most, I think for me, it was one of the most, I mean, it's the reason that we got good, frankly. If we had not been competing,
No
I
way.
probably wouldn't be sitting here on this call, and so, yeah, I think everybody, if you're in your 20s, you're in your early 30s, you need to compete, and I really, I feel strongly about that. One of the reasons I, gave up my class that I've been teaching for a decade, I gave it to Carlos because he's competing and he's tough as hell and he really is, he's learning a ton of jiu-jitsu and I wasn't, I wasn't competing, and it felt like I was doing everybody a disservice in that regard, because I really think it's important, like Mike said, if you're teaching class, then you got to get out there and you got to compete. And it's when we were coming up, it wasn't like it wasn't really a choice, like, and I appreciated it. And so all the people like specifically like Elliot putting pressure on us to compete. I'm glad he did, because it made us better. And I think I don't think there's anything wrong with us putting some pressure on people to compete, because I think it's really easy to lie to yourself. And I think it's what it boils down to. You really got to dig deep and see what your honest reason for not competing is. Because is it really the $30 to $50 or the $100? Is
Or
that
the
really what it
knee
is?
hurts, the knee's a little sore, my lower back's a little
Yeah,
painful. Is it really that? Is it the back injury?
please.
Like, come on. I just know it's not
Yeah,
true.
man, we competed hurt all the time.
People are gonna. I hope people
You
listen to the
know,
podcast and get mad. I hope people get mad. I want
get
them to get
mad.
mad. You
Yeah,
know, Like,
Yeah.
fucking be offended by this. That's okay. Let's have it out. Let's talk about the real reasons. We're not here to sugarcoat things. I
Our
want to talk about
generation
the
was
real
tougher than
reasons.
yours.
That's what every generation says.
Prove me wrong.
Um,
I know. That was a joke, sort of.
all right, we're gonna pivot off competition a little bit here and move on. We're gonna talk about a lot this year because we're not gonna lose this battle-tested side of us. Um, not on my watch, I'll tell you that. So we will get more into it at a later date. So Ian, pivoting a little bit. Um, it's hard to pivot after this. What is your favorite thing about this community?
Oh, well, I mean, obviously it's the people, like, it's hard for me to say. Like, feel like pretty much everything in my life comes from Easton in some way. It's connected to it, you know. So yeah, I think it's the people, and I do think Easton, it pushes people to become their best selves at the end of the day. And I really think, jokes aside, what we were just doing, it's that the spirit of really pushing people for people to compete is because that's what, we want everybody who's in this community to reach their potential, and you have to pressure test, and Easton, the community pressure tests you, and I love that about what we're doing. um and it's always been that way. I feel like I've become a much better person because of Easton and the people in it. And that's, so that, I think there are a lot of things I love about it. All my closest friends are here. Um, but at the end of the day, I feel like I owe a lot of what I have in my life to this community, and the fact that it pushes people to be the best they can be.
Yeah. Alex always says this quote, Alex Huddleston, and I've obviously I've heard it for years, but I think about it a lot in the whole spiel we just gave about, like, we were being forceful. I was being, I don't know, maybe it comes off as blunt or aggressive, but I think it's really important when I say these things or when we say these things, or people that even say these things, it's really about care, right? Like in that quote that Alex always says, like, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Like, I think that's really important. Everybody that is at Easton really fucking cares. Um, and if the person that is putting pressure on you like this, if you don't think they care about you, then obviously you're not going to hear it. So I think it's important to note, like, we're not just doing this. It's not like you have to do this to make Easton look good. Man, whether you compete or not, it's not going to change how Easton looks. But we know from coming up that putting pressure on yourself is going to make you a fucking better human being. You're going to come out the other side stronger. You're going to come out the other side improved. So just to double down on that. Let's keep going. What is the most painful part of your job? Ian works with me, and he is in charge of all the general managers and the performance of the individual schools. So that's 8 general managers and the school's performance. So he runs meetings with all of them. He has individual meetings with them. He goes and checks the schools and makes sure they're up to par. Um, in my opinion, I think it's one of the hardest jobs of the company, as well as, like, maybe the most exhaustive, because there's nothing that doesn't fit into it in that box. So, Ian, with that being said, the most painful part of your job.
Well, the most painful part of my job, and I'm really listening to the words that you're some. I mean, the word painful. It's Man, I love the whole team, and it's having to let people know that they're coming up short, and feeling that, because, if they're coming up short, I'm coming up short. You know what I mean? And there's some, because I view my role as I'm here to support the team, and to provide support, to provide guidance. And when I, have to have a hard conversation with one of the GMs, um, because I love them all, and and they know this. They're very good friends. All of them are very good friends of mine. That's painful. It's hard. It's hard. It's hard expressing um, just, I guess, discontentment with someone's performance who you love and care about. Now it's and every time this has happened, the response has always been great, right? So it's not they make it much less painful than it could be, but it's still difficult for sure.
Yeah. I think about,
But the word painful is different than hardest.
yeah, that's why I use painful on purpose. I'm listening to that book, The
Yeah.
Motive by Patrick Lencioni, and I've been enjoying it quite a bit. It's a short book, but I think I was thinking about what you said there and tying it into parenting a little bit. I think what sometimes people get confused about is we have the program directors and the HQ team, and originally that team is called the Easton Support Team, right? Now, support team means we're here to, like, we're not like technical support on like a or roadies on a musician's crew, right? We're not just here to support by making sure the sound is right. The you're not in charge of us kind of thing, but we're here to support you as like think about like parenting, right? And this is a rough analogy metaphor here, but I am here to support and guide my children, right? I can't fire them, right? But I'm also here to create boundaries and discipline them where necessary, you know? And just because I am here to support them doesn't mean they're my boss, right? And I think that's an important detail that sometimes gets muddy between departments. We are the support team for the rest of the company, but we're also, just like in parenting, we support our children, we support the team. We're also the ones that have to make the final decision, whether it's disciplinary action or the direction we're moving. So I think it's important people don't get confused with the name support team with your lackeys or you're our boss. Um, we're here to support you, not here to dictate your life, but we also are here to guide you and at the end of the day make the hard decisions. So I just want to clarify that term support because sometimes I've heard it taken into like, well, you're here to support us. I'm like, yes, we're also here to guide. We're also here to make the final decision. We're also here to fucking do that, make the hard decisions. So let's not get confused that we work for you. We work together, but the buck stops somewhere and is with us. Um, why do you stay at Easton? Because you've been here since 2006. You've been general managing since 2012. You've been teaching since 2007 or 8, I think, 2007 maybe, as an intro instructor. You moved into the HQ team a few years ago. I don't even know how many years now. Well, I guess you've always kind of been on it. You just moved off the general manager role a few years ago. You came an owner a couple years ago. But this hasn't always been easy, right? What keeps you here? And now you own your own
Oh,
business.
it's,
So sorry, you own your own
I
business
mean,
too. You
there's
own Art of the Dog, and
yeah,
yeah, what is it?
there's a lot of reasons. I mean, this is like a huge part of my life. You know what I mean? Like it's not like I really can't imagine my life without Easton at this point. And I don't really ever want to imagine it without Easton. Um, it's and there's so many reasons, but it's the community, it's the people, and man, like I have to say, is my job is hard, but it's awesome. I think I've managed to keep really good perspective, and I'm very grateful for Easton, and I've never lost that gratitude. And it's like I've worked other jobs hard, and I know what it's like. You know, I've never really worked at a place where I feel like the people have a genuine interest in, like, really care about me the way they do at Easton. And I, in turn, care about the people I work with. So I don't know. I mean, like, I can't imagine my life without it. Like, even thinking about that world doesn't make any sense to me. So, um, yeah, it's such a core part of my life at this point. It feels like inextricable from it, you know. So I'm grateful every day for it.
So I mean, you're well. Is that a privileged position since you're like kind of top level leadership? Do you think that's why?
Uh, are you asking like, do I feel this way because I have this cush position? Is that what you're
Not just the coach position, but you're in a
asking?
position of power, a position of like help dictating the way the company
Oh,
goes.
and again, like since I'm speaking from where I'm sitting, it's hard to understand the counterfactual, but I guess what I'd say is I don't feel much different than I did when I was cleaning. I started off cleaning mats. I was cleaning mats, and I remember vividly thinking to myself, um, first of all, like just to kind of talk about, and people who know me know this, but when I worked as a valet, like there was when most for from literally until I was 31 years old, 30 no 32, 31 or 32, I worked as 22 to 32, 10 years I worked as a valet. And all the while, and I worked long weeks, right? I worked, a lot of they were mostly 10-hour days, and I worked a lot of 6, 7 day weeks. And the guy who I worked for, I'm really glad I had him as a boss because he
Glenn,
was really, yeah, he was not well adjusted. He was a maniac, and but I worked long weeks and then I trained and I taught, and I cleaned mats. I used to get done valeting and then go clean the mats, and I just always felt grateful, like because and maybe it was because my life was, I felt lost before I found Easton. And then once I found Easton, I found who I felt like I found some sort of path, that I was very grateful for it. And so I don't feel now more grateful than I did then. I just, I'm very grateful, and I don't feel like, one thing that I think has helped me is I don't feel like I have a cush position, or that
I didn't say
I'm in a
Kush.
position
You
of
said
power
Kush.
necessarily. No, 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 no. I know, but I think it's implied, right? It's like you have power, right? And like, I don't feel, first of all, I've always felt very strongly that if someone really wants power, they probably shouldn't have it, right? If you're the type of person that really wants to be the boss, maybe you shouldn't be the boss. Because I have to say, like being like, like I don't relish power. I certainly don't crave it, and there are many times, and I know you feel this way, Mike, where sometimes it's the last thing I want, right? Because when it ultimately comes down to, yeah, it's like that saying, with power comes great responsibility, and that happens to be true, and you end up having to have very difficult discussions with people, and um, there are times where you're like, I wish anyone else in the world would handle what I have to deal with right now, and that's just part of it, but um, no, I don't think it has changed. Uh, I don't think it really has had an effect on how grateful I feel. I am grateful for it, of course. I'm grateful that I'm here, and I'm grateful that uh, have this job. And I think that's what keeps me on my toes because I can lose it. And I know that. I say this all the time to people. Like, you're one of my closest friends. I know you'd fire me. I know this. I know this to a moral certainty, and that's why I care about my performance. I care, and it's my gratitude that keeps me pushing hard, you know. I also want to do a good job. I care about doing a good job. I care about this community, and if I don't do a good job, it has real consequences, and it has consequences for the people listening. If I do a shitty job, right, that's a problem. So anyway, it's a very long-winded way of saying that. Yeah, no, I'm very grateful, and I don't think it really has anything to do with the fact that I have power, because I've never wanted power. It's not something I care about, right? And yeah.
It's true. Everything I agree with everything you said. I think there's an important story to tell. Ian invited me to Easton, and then like we started falling in love with it, or he was already in love with it, and I started falling in love with it. And Ian talked about a time when we were older, when we would open a school together and be owners of a school, and we were gonna like we'd own a school and we'd do it out of state because we never want to compete with Easton, and that was like Ian's dream, and he invited me to take part in that dream. And I was like, dude, I'm in. That's our goal. Okay, let's do it. And like, of course, I was 24 and I've had plenty of goals that didn't come to fruition because I didn't know what it was like to actually attain a goal. And at that time, it felt the same. Like I didn't really know what that meant. It was just like, yeah, that's what we'll do. And I could tell people like, yeah, my story is to eventually do this with Ian as a partner and we'll own our own school. And we talked about it. We never made any progress towards it, because we weren't planning on it. We wanted to train to wear like black belts and then give it a shot. And eventually, when Ian didn't take the general manager job in Boulder and I got it, it was like, okay, we'll use this job as like learning how to run a business. It'll be an internship. We'll learn how to run the business, and then we can do our own thing. We'll move out of state with Amal's blessing. And of course, once we got in that role, like we realized like there was more opportunity. Like Ellie got involved, and there seemed like there was more opportunity to take Easton somewhere where it hadn't been yet. And the dream of owning a school wasn't like it was gone, but we were like, man, we love this community. We don't want to ever leave this community. And like going to own our own school would mean leaving that community. Not that we were scared of starting fresh. That wasn't like a fear, but it was like leaving this company that we had been a part of for so long and could help build further. We didn't want to back away from that. So it came from, okay, we want to own our own school to, hey, how can we make Easton a place that we have a real career at as well as others? And that turned into our real dream, like how can we create more opportunities like were created for us? And in that process, we learned a lot about business and we were able to open up our own business, one that didn't compete with Easton, and one that we're not operators on, so we don't partake in. We help a little bit here and there, but it's almost like owning real estate. You don't do much work. But we got that through our work at Easton and learning how to run a business and studying and using this as a lab. So we're like internally grateful for what Easton has done for us too, like the education it has given us. And for me, like I'm always stoked that people decide to like, hey, man, I love Easton. I want to do this. I want to have a career here. That's awesome. Let's see if we can, you can build a career here. If not, if you want to open your own business and what you learn, that's great. But if you're going to open a competitive business with Easton, we're always like, hey, that's fine, but you have to do it out of state or we can't work with you anymore because you're competing with the 27 years of work we put into building this one. And this is hard for people to hear. But this, we did it and others can do it too if they do it the right way. I don't know why I'm going on that tangent, but I think about how much this community means to us, why we stay with it and why we stayed and didn't open our own thing, because we loved Easton and we're like, let's make this that for us. And what Easton has given us, because Amal and Elliot have given us the opportunity to kind of do what we want. Like, hey, yeah, you keys to the castle. It's good luck, And obviously they've been supportive, but like they're very open to like, yeah, they don't get in the way. And that has been super cool to let us play with the business the way we have. Anyway, okay, a little pivot here.
So,
Then we move to the
Mike,
next. Yeah, go ahead.
one thing that I just wanted to say, because I do think it's an important detail, everything you said was dead accurate. There was just one piece, and you said something like, when I didn't take the job, right? That's not really what happened. We both applied and you got the job. I didn't, and I think this matters because, and again, I don't want this to come off as like me applauding myself for acting correctly, right? But that was hard initially. Like when you got the job and I didn't, right? Um, I had been there longer, right? I had been teaching, and then they gave you the job. And I just remember, you have that moment where you have to check yourself. And, it's like, and it's like the reason that was difficult is because I was jealous. And I think it's important to acknowledge, you can have a feeling and then not identify with it. And I knew even in that moment when I was jealous that you were the right call. It was the right decision. And obviously it was the right decision, and I'm so glad they made that decision. And I'm so glad that like I was mature enough in that moment to just be like, it's cool. Like keep working. He is the right person. And obviously, man, I was happy, you know, you were one of my closest friends then, and I wanted to see you succeed, And I think it's an important thing. It's like when someone else, just because somebody else gets the role that you wanted, it doesn't mean that your journey is over. It doesn't mean that you can't continue to work hard and find success yourself, and that resources aren't as limited as I think we often think they are. But I think that's an important thing to point out, because Easton, we're built. It's still being built. We're building opportunity, and that means that all of us. It doesn't mean that you just get what you want when you want it. It doesn't mean that, if there's there's no guarantees here, and it's like there's an element of like having to really believe in what we're doing, work as hard as you can, and trust the process, and I'm glad Amal and Elliot made the decision they made, because Easton probably this wouldn't be happening if they didn't. So anyway, I just think that's an important thing to say, right? Because it makes it sound like I gave the job to you, and it's not what happened.
Okay, Elliot wasn't part of it then. He was still in the UFC, so it was just Amal at that time interviewing. And here's what happened when I walked into the interview room, just so we're clear. They were interviewing me and three others. And one of them was Ian. So there's four total people being interviewed. I was the last one to get interviewed other than Maximus, but they'd already interviewed James and Ian. And I walked in, and Amal goes to me, he's like, so we interviewed James and Ian, and they both said, you should be the one that gets the job, Mike. Tell us why they said that. So like Ian and James had already said to them, they already sat back and said, man, this is the person that they sat back and said, this is the person that should lead the ship, not us, which takes crazy humility. And so whether it was right or wrong, let's think about what Ian did that moment, right? He put Easton first. Not saying he put Easton first by putting me there, but he was like, I think it's important that, and I'd been general managing a shop for 8 years at that point. So I've been a general manager for a long time already. So the humility Ian put forth before that happened. I mean, I think Ian still would have taken the job if they offered it to him, but he did say, Mike's probably the right person for this job. And just to clarify some of the story and history here. But yes, all of this takes humility.
It was like 18 years ago.
We all may miss 14, over 14.
14.
Miss our opportunity, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying. Like, it's when we lose a competition, doesn't mean we should quit competing, right? When we lose a match against somebody, it doesn't mean we should stop trying to beat that person, right? It's not about the victory, but it's about continuing the journey and the path. So just to point that out. Last question before we pivot. Tell us a story that took place at Easton where you saw a community member's life change for the better, or something that you experienced at Easton that you found quite profound. I know you have a lot of these stories that I've heard from you over the years from being in Denver.
Yeah, I mean there are so many, that it's hard for me to pin one answer down. I mean, I can just think of so many, you know what I mean? But I can't. Yeah, I feel like if I choose one, then another one comes into my head, and they're like, "That's good," But um, it, it's, I guess, and you can edit this, right? So you don't have to. People don't have to sit here and hear me like hemming and hawing over who I want to choose.
Yeah, Phipps will listen to it. The more editing he has to do, the more mad he is at me. But yeah.
Okay. Um, I tell you what, I'll think there's a guy who someone recently that I think about. There's a guy who I started playing chess, right? And there's this guy who was a chess instructor there, and he was very overweight. I'm talking probably like 400 pounds. And um, I'd go in with my jujitsu shirt, and one day he just kind of sheepishly asked me if I train, and I told him I do. And basically, a long story short, is I was able to get him to come in and try a class. And he called me before he went in, and he basically told me that he was, more nervous than he's ever been, and that he doesn't want to do it. Told me like that he was sweating in the car, like just thinking about walking in the door. And I called, Carlos, and, I basically was like, hey man, can you take care of this guy? And he was like, oh, I already have. he already, because I got off the phone. His name was Rich. I got off the phone with Rich, and I called Carlos. He's like, "Oh yeah, we're already talking to him. We're good, man. We already got this." And it was Carlos. I want to mention Heather in Denver. She's one of the instructors there. Like before, I didn't even have to call them. They were already rolling out the red carpet for this guy because they could tell he was nervous and scared. And a long story short is, he actually moved and he's still doing jujitsu. So chess took him somewhere else. He was like a very high level chess player, but he likes jujitsu more than he likes chess, and he's told me that since. And I feel like, the other thing he said is that he's been in the chess community for 30 years, and that he's never felt closer to a community than he has the Easton community. And that's because people took him in and they took care of him, and he's lost a lot of weight. Uh, and again, he's still a white belt. I think he's now a four-stripe white belt. But, and whether he'll continue or not, I hope he does. But just our community's ability to make people feel like they matter is, I really don't think it's like this in any other community I've ever been in. And I've been in a bunch. I've done the dog training. I've been in the dog training community. I've been in the chess community. I was in the hockey community. Nothing compares to the jiu-jitsu Muay Thai community, and more specifically the Easton community. So, Rich is just someone I can think of like off the top of my head, because I think, I think about how afraid he was, how many ways this could go wrong for someone, like Rich. And I think about how well it went, and he's just one example. But there are the pause in me thinking of someone is because there are so many great examples I can talk about. Um, I mean, there are people who are like who have been, I could our lives. I mean, I can, I just think of I mean, really, the problem is with this question, it's everyone. I mean, everyone who is a purple belt and up, and I'm sure I'm leaving out now all the blue belts, but everybody who's a purple belt and up can look at this and say, man, this has changed my life. I think very few people who stay with this don't have this sentiment towards what we're doing and towards Easton. But Rich is just one example of thousands.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. I've heard that story a bunch, and I'm always impressed by your ability to tell these stories and not cry, because I'm always like over here fighting back tears. But I always get very emotional when I hear these stories. Uh, and yeah, I agree. Right? I think you're right about the blue belts and up. Like, they all have a story to tell about how it's changed them. And we do a thing every year at our DH offsite where we request stories from our student body about how jiu-jitsu's changed their life or affected their life in a positive way, and always get some incredible stories that we like to read or have everybody read at the leadership offsite with all the department heads and main instructors. And it's really a fun recall to why we do all of this. We can have this high level competitors. We
Yeah.
can also have life changing events. I think it's important to have both. I think about it as like, you can be a badass. You can also be wildly kind. I talk to my kids every morning or Calvin at least, every morning I drop them off. And I got this from, I think, Tom Brady's dad. But I say two things to him every day. It's like, don't take any wooden nickels from anyone. And they go, what does that mean? I'm like, don't take shit from anyone. And then I said, be kind to everyone. And those are like the two things we talk about every day. Like, you can stand up for yourself and not be an asshole. You can be super kind and not be a pushover. And like, those two qualities for me are like wildly important for my children. Because if you're just stand up to everybody, you can become a bully if you're not kind. If you're kind to everybody and you don't stand up for others and yourself, you become a pushover. So I think those are the two things that holding those two things is very important to create a very solid human being. There's other obvious pieces, but these two things we're talking about today, the competition and these stories that change people's lives. Like Carlos is a fucking monster, you know, and he is extremely kind and patient, and he's a real human, and he immediately took care of that. So I think it's important that you have that. And I love that story. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, my favorite part of it is the fact that I didn't even have to like. I was so amazed by just the immediate response to him walking in the door and how welcomed everyone made him feel. You know, it was like that was a very cool moment. You know, because it was literally like 15-minute lag between me speaking to Rich and then me speaking and then me talking to Carlos, and he's like, "Oh yeah, we're already on this." Like he is, and it was, and he had an amazing experience. And this guy, you know, and he and Rich struggled, man. You know what I mean? And you know, it's been a little while since I've spoken to him, and I hope he's doing well. But that will always have, I know that that will always matter to him. You know, and then there's just nothing like it. I always, sorry, go ahead.
No, I want to move to the next part, but I want to point out something here that I think maybe not
Yeah.
everybody understands. So I've been the one that kind of created the HQ team. I decided on the CEO and came up with the roles. Someone is at the front door. Okay. Hold on a second. My aunt. 1 second.
Yep.
Somehow they plugged in the Ring, and now my kid's playing with the Ring thing, and it's connected to my Alexa. Anyway, what I was saying was I think it's really key that Ian Lieberman specifically is in this role. And Ian, you can bear with me. You'll agree with this, I think, but it's not always easy to hear. Ian wasn't always the best at systems. He doesn't always see all the little details that well, right? Like we were general managers at the same time, and I used to go in. I'd be like, man, why is this like this? Did you not notice that the XYZ is happening? And he'd be like, oh yeah. Like that's not always been his strong suit, right? Like noticing the small things. And it used to drive me crazy because that's usually what I'm pretty good at. Like I had the little details, and I used to get so mad at him, right? But which is important, right? Don't get me wrong, that's important. The aesthetics and like these little things, but what Ian excels at is connecting with human beings and seeing like the greatness in them and helping them utilize that piece of them. So there is a reason when, like, yes, Ian is the director of general managers. And yes, one of Ian's weak spots sometimes is not seeing all the small things at the academies that I wish he could see. It does still frustrate me, right? But that is a tiny, tiny piece to what makes him excellent. Ian is a great leader that excelled at developing people in Denver, right? You go into that school and you can see how much every single person in that community really cares about all the students. Like from the front desk to the department heads to the instructors to the general manager to the academy operations director, they all really see people. Like you go in there and you can tell that there is a culture of like, we are really here for the community. We are not here for selfish reasons. And the Denver team like exuded that when Ian was the GM there. Like you could they embodied that whole idea. And they're also badasses. And so for me, when looking for this position, other than Ian being the obvious for tenure reasons, it wasn't just that. It was that Ian's not an asshole. He's a selfless human being that will always put Easton first. And I think that story really points to that because he developed those individuals. And yeah, I just wanted to say, like, there's a reason I'm going to cry. God damn it. That is why he's here. Because when I look at Ian, I think he's when it comes to like humanity, he is one of the best of us. So that's why he's the one in charge of all the general managers who guide the experience for everybody at the individual locations. My tissue box is hidden. Damn it. It's empty. All right, next question. This is the pivot. This is the fun stuff. So Ian and I have talked about mortality quite a bit. He's a philosophical dude, so I put some questions together today to just ask him this. And this is going to be a longer podcast with some edits that Mike's going to have to make. Ian, we're going to jump right into these. Do you have a secret hunch about how you will die?
Um, well, I think like most people, my main concern is I get cancer or something like that. I think that's statistically speaking probably how it's going to happen. Um, but I don't really have, no, I don't, I don't say I have like a hunch on any particular thing, but yeah, I would say my biggest fear is cancer, some sort of it.
Okay. If you could change anything about the way you were raised, what would it be?
This is a tough question because it's hard to answer because I look at the way I look at my life now, and I look at like I like to think that I'm fairly well adjusted. I'm sure I could be more well adjusted, but I'm happy with I don't know what the counterfactual would be. Like if I was raised differently, would I have ended up differently? And I'm happy with my life at the moment. So I wouldn't change it. But, I guess yeah, there are things about my childhood that I wasn't stoked about, and I could um there are things yeah, I think there are definitely things about my childhood I wasn't stoked about. Like
Let me
um
let me
oh, I'll just
rephrase
talk
it.
about it, so my
I
yeah.
can rephrase it. You can change the things about your childhood or how you're raised, right? Whatever you want, but it wouldn't change who you are or where you are today.
Okay. Um yeah, well, I get so my dad is very sick right now, right? He's very sick, and he'll never hear this podcast, so I can just speak freely. But he's been sick. He's dying. It's been like this for about 8 months. I don't know how much longer is left. Um, and he, my dad had a really rough upbringing, right? And I'm sort of setting the stage for the fact that he left a lot to be desired. I think as a dad, he was he it was he was a very hard person to live with, and he was the one who was home, and he was yeah, he wasn't he was pretty violent, he was pretty hostile, he was yeah, he was just just a hard person to be around. He was yeah, he was virulent, all these things. And he was scary. He was a tyrant, and he was just I always felt like I had to protect like my brother and sister from him, and it was just it wasn't ideal. There's no other way to put it. And now I'm in this weird place of wanting to be a good son, and um because I know he's scared, and I know he's like, and I think I know he knows he's dying and he's kind of in denial about it. And I'm trying to be a good son and trying to put all of that bad history behind me. And it's hard. It really has become difficult. Um, so I would have changed that. I guess I would have started, and maybe a more compassionate thing to say is I wish he had had a better childhood because maybe he would have been a better father, but he wasn't. And it's I think part of the reason I have some strengths are because of how shitty it was. And I really don't like speaking about this that much because like I don't like sitting in it. You know what I mean? I don't like thinking about it. I really hate victimhood stuff. I don't want to be like, oh, I had a bunch of trauma. I can't stand any of that stuff. It's like it was what it was, and you move forward, and you try to be better. You know what I mean? But like yeah, if I'm being candid, um, that I didn't see much of my mom because she was always working. They had a terrible marriage. That's come to roost. You always hope that when you get near the end, that as you're, someone who's 85 and in the sort of dusk of life, could sit back and be and be and have some wisdom to impart, right? For the not only for us but for himself. Could sit back and say, like I'm near the end. Maybe it's time I start not being so selfish and um, thinking of others and being grateful for the life I've lived. But no, none of that's happened. It's just been a really shitty, upsetting end, and they're still not getting along, and um, it's been unpleasant, but so I changed that. But I would start with having a better childhood. He did not. His childhood was terrible. He didn't have parents really. Um,
Can you elaborate
so
on
yeah,
that? I think it's important. So something that Ian's always helped me with, and I think Sam Harris helps with this too, is when we're sitting there mad about somebody, um, if we back up far enough, we find a moment to like remember when they were children and what shaped them. And I know this, it doesn't help in the moment, but like when I can sit back, I can, like my dad passed on Thanksgiving, very similar story as Ian's. And I think when I get like, I wish it was different at the end, like, man, I wish we connected as a man to man. I go to that like place where I'm like, well, if I can back up far enough, he had a really shitty childhood. XYZ happened, so this helped develop him this way. It doesn't take away from the trauma, but it helps you be a little bit more forgiving, or that's I guess big picture minded, or gives you space from that like frustration and hatred, that myopic view, to like be uh, just some perspective. And I think it's important, Ian. Like I think I would love for you to share like what just the briefly
yeah.
what your father's childhood was like, because I think that's a key piece that not everybody is aware of, and I think it matters.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like, yeah, what you just said is exactly how I think about it. And like, I do, up until recently, and I'm going to talk about his history in a minute, what I understand of it, which is very little because he's very quiet about it. But up until recently, every time I talk about my dad, I would start with the sort of disclaimer that I love him. I'd say, I love my dad, and and then I talk about him, and I've stopped doing that. But I do love my dad. I do, and I think he's at heart, deep down, I think he's a good person. But he's a very, very unwise person, but he had a terrible upbringing. So most of his family was killed in the Holocaust, and he was raised basically by his older brother, and he didn't go to high school. He's very so. This was always like a theme in my childhood with him. It was like he was jealous of the fact that like we had things easier than he did, and I remember him talking about it. You know, but again, like I understand, like he's had a pretty unhappy life, but at some point it becomes self-imposed because you can always, I don't think competing in the suffering Olympics is good for anyone ever. And it's like, and this is sort of the paradox I've always felt exists. It's like you have to be able, people who have more owe a debt to those who have less. I've always felt that, right? If you're lucky, you owe a debt to the unlucky, or you should, or you should at the very least be very compassionate to people who are less fortunate than you. The paradox, of course, is the moment you start feeling unlucky and you start being the victim, you're fucked. Like you are like it is such a trap to avoid, and so my dad could never avoid it, and he's just been an eternal victim. Did he have some really bad things happen to him? Absolutely. Did he have a really shitty childhood? 100%. Sure sounds like it. And he doesn't talk about it much. He's very weird about it. He doesn't discuss it. Like I didn't find the details out until pretty recently. I knew that a lot of his family was killed in the gas chambers, but I didn't realize to the extent, you know, because he's closed-lipped about it. But he never got to the point where he could take like accountability for his own life and his own decisions. But to your point, Mike, yeah, it's like basically even with the, and I want to be clear about some things. I don't want too much ambiguity to linger here. Like, and the fact that I even have to say this, and this is getting very personal, but there was never anything like it never breached until it was never like molestation or anything like that. But it was just physical violence. He was abusive, and he was fucking scary, and he was just he never, a couple things is like he never like, like really beat me with a closed fist or anything like that, you know, but it wasn't good. You know what I mean? It's like the fact that I have to give these sort of this firewall of caveats. It's not, it wasn't fun, and my younger brother had it the worst. So, but I think that this is where like I am a peacekeeper. Like I am always, and I'm very perceptive about how people are feeling. And I think that comes from when you're a kid and you have a survival mechanism. And I had to pay attention to him. Like, how is he in this moment? Because the moment like you'd see him tip into that moment where he's not so good, you're in like survival mode, and I think that has stuck with me into adulthood. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm good at my job. I'm very aware of how people are feeling, you know. But yeah, no, my dad had a really rough upbringing, and the reason I think it's helpful is because I can be compassionate. Like, and that's why I love my dad. I know he struggled, and you rewind the clock back far enough, and he's just a 6-year-old having life. When you're 6 and you're a kid, and things are happening to you out of your control, it's really hard. It's hard to be mad at that 6-year-old. And so anyway, it helps me and that's all it gives you is the ability to be more compassionate to people. And even when people mistreat you, something Amal said to me a long time ago, there was this guy, and I don't remember the specifics of it, but some dude was being really rude to us outside of a business. We used to go eat at this like restaurant all the time, and we were walking by, and there was this guy standing out there, and he was like mean mugging us. And we got in the car, and Amal was like, "Man, like I feel bad for him, like that's I because he looks at himself in the mirror every day, and if you're going to act like that, something's going wrong in your life." And I just think going that extra step every time you have a bad interaction with someone, whether they're close to you or there's someone out in the world, maybe you're just driving behind them and they're going really slowly. It's just understanding that all of us as human beings, like it's hard to be a human being. We all suffer, and it's the sharing that humanity is a way to not be constantly upset with people, because it doesn't really do me any good or anyone any good.
Well, thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Part of this podcast is about really getting to know the team. So sometimes a little background really goes a long way. Can we keep going down the list
Can I
here?
say something?
Yeah, of course.
I always have this fear, right? And I think this is the hard part for me. I always have this fear when I speak poorly of my dad. I don't want other people to think poorly of him.
Yeah. I don't think that's your place to
Yeah.
change their judgment. I know what you mean,
No, it's not.
but I
But
think you're
you know,
sharing your story. They don't actually know your father. They didn't experience him in that way. Like
of
uh,
course.
for me, right? Like we had the funeral, right? I didn't know my dad at all, but we had the funeral, and I know he was loved by his colleagues and loved by like he was a counselor, so he helped people like that had disabilities find like cars, jobs. Like that was his job from 21 years old till death. Really, he worked till he died, and they loved him. He was the funny guy. He was outgoing, kind. Maybe not the most at sharing his emotions, but everybody loved him. And that's not the man I knew at all. And I think about that, like, huh? So I knew when I went there to the funeral, and I had this in my mind, like I was like, before he died, 10 years before he died, like I know I'm gonna meet all these people that were close to my dad and loved him and thought he was an amazing guy and blah blah blah. And in my mind, I'm gonna be like, man, that's not the person I knew. But I think what was key there, especially like celebrating life, was to recognize that we're not just our one of our behaviors. You know, we are all of the things we've done in this world. That makes us who we are. And so when I had to like sit up there on stage, and I think I had probably the hardest relationship with my father for sure, out of anybody in his life, as being the only boy. But I was like, well, man, somebody needs to write a eulogy for this man, and nobody wanted to do it. And I was like, man, I gotta do something. I gotta write this eulogy. And I remember like I rewrote it. I went on like a 10-mile run when I was out there, and I rewrote it like 15 times in my head over and over and over again. And then I wrote it the night before. And like what I really wanted to touch in on was, that whole aspect of him, right? Not just my relationship. So I didn't really talk about our relationship. I said, yeah, it was strained, but I also talked about all the good things from everybody his friends, his colleagues, and like that's who made him who he was. He wasn't just my dad, you know. And I think like when I was able to step back far enough and like see that piece of it, I was able to like find a new appreciation. Like, okay, maybe he wasn't the best with me. Doesn't mean he didn't care, but he was great with other people. And for your dad, like, man, your dad was on the cover of Time magazine for being a photographer at one point. Like, he did some incredible things. He was an
Yep.
amazing, beautiful artist. And that's a piece of him, How he parented you is a piece of him. How he husband is a piece of him, There's just, we are not just our one behavior. We're not just our one relationship. And I think if people can realize that when hearing these stories, they can recognize like, oh, that sucks. But he doesn't need to be thrown away with the bathwater.
Yeah. No, and that's a great way to put it. Um, and he does love, I know he loves me. I know that. He just has a not so, he's a unique way of showing it. But yeah,
This
I,
is why
I
we're
really see
mentors
that.
at Easton. This is why we have to keep mentoring people because we're not all, our parents may have not always been the greatest. Like whether your parents are good or not, right? They're not your only mentors. You need to find other ones.
Oh,
Okay. There's some more stuff I want to ask. Like I said, this would be a long form. This question, I was super curious to see what you would say. Is there something that you've dreamed of doing for a long time, and why haven't you done it yet? To preface this, Ian is a homebody, right? He's not a big traveler. He likes to be with his dogs. He likes his routine. He likes spends his walks with his wife, his meals. Like he likes his home life. Um, so that's why I'm curious where this will lead for Ian. And he likes Steamboat. He loves going to Steamboat.
yeah. Is there anything that I really want to do? I have to say, like, I feel privileged in the sense that the things I really want to do, I mostly and do. Maybe I need to dream bigger. Maybe that's a problem. But um, no, I think like um, I think ultimately like Ashley and I want to go to Europe and to do it for a couple weeks. And again, all of this stuff is totally within range. We could do it now if we wanted. But um, we're pretty happy. Like I not really. Like I guess to that question, it's like I I tend to the things I really want to do. We make it happen and we kind of do it. And I one of the things that I was talking about to Ashley the other day was like, whenever we do go anywhere, and we are homebodies. I think both of us are to an extent, but it's also love. We love our lives. I love what I do every day. You know what I mean? I find myself even when we're in Steamboat near the end of it, looking forward to coming home and just doing and going back to quote work. You know what I mean? Like I like what I do. So not really.
Yeah,
There's nothing I'm pining to do that I'm not doing.
I'm with you, man. Like, yeah, like I want my kids to experience stuff they want to experience, but like at this point, I love my life. I love the roadness of it, the day to day, it's not mundane. It's the same thing over and over again, but there's beauty in the same thing over and over again. Especially, yeah, I agree. Like even like I don't have dreams to travel. My kids like, can we go to Japan? Can we go here? Can we go here? I'm like, yeah, one day we can. Sure, I'm stoked. Let's do it. Let's find a way to make it happen. Um, but I'd be doing it for them at that point, and it's just another day to spend with the kids and the family. Um, what is your life's greatest accomplishment?
What was my greatest accomplishment? That's a great question. Uh, I guess, uh, and this is going to be weird because she's sitting. We don't really usually talk this way, but it's my relationship with my wife.
Oh,
I feel like yeah, if I'm being honest, like we get along. Like she's, I don't know, I feel very fortunate. That's so yeah, that's my greatest accomplishment.
I think that's a big one. It's the one you spend the most time with. So I think if you have a great relationship with your wife, not to validate you, but I think that's a really big deal. Um, what do you value most about friendship?
What do I value most about friendship? Well, yeah, man, I think this is what life is at the end of the day. This is what it's all about. There's like this. I love that movie. It's a Wonderful Life. It's like one of my favorite movies, and there's this part in it where, and for those of if you haven't watched it, like you really should because it's not just it's a Christmas movie for sure, but it's a pretty deep movie. But
It's a
there's
lot
this
more than
one
that.
scene where he, yeah, it really is. There's this one scene where the main character looks at a picture hanging on the wall, and it says, uh, yeah, the only thing you get to take with you is all that you've given away. And I think what that really means is like, yeah, man, the best part about having friends is having that sort of reciprocal relationship where you give to, you give your love and trust and support to others, and you get to hopefully have people in your life that you care more about than yourself. Then you care more about them than you care about yourself, and hopefully they might feel the same way about you. And that's the stuff that really matters because like, I there's this, not to like there's another story I have that I think about this a lot. When I valeted, uh, there was this guy who used to come in all the time. His name was Michael Egan. He was like, so I valeted there for 10 years, and this dude came in for like 7 of those years, and he'd come in almost every month, and we became friends. And I was 20, probably 27, 28 at the time, and he was probably 45. He's come in, he had this, he's obviously very successful, had this beautiful wife, you know, um, and he was just the man. Like this guy was just one of those people that you look at and you're like, wow, I want to be like this dude. Well, one day I came in and uh, some of the guys were like in tears, and he had died. He was, I guess, in a mountain, like a mountain biking accident. And his brother, he had a twin brother, and his brother, his brother's name was Chris, and he didn't come very often, but I saw him from on occasion. I never saw his wife again. His wife's name was Rebecca, and we never saw her again. But Chris probably showed up 2 years after Mike had died, and I was taking Chris up to his room, and he was like, "You're still here, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah, man, I am." It's good to see you. I hadn't seen him again in 2 years since Michael had passed. And he was like, "What do you want to do in your life?" And I was like, "Oh, I want to go, own a jiu-jitsu school." And I gave him the whole thing. And he was like, "Hey, man, do you know how Mike died?" And I was like, "Yeah, he's in a mountain biking accident." He was like, "Well, I was with him, and here's what happened." And he told me what happened. He was like, he and I were biking. They were up in like they're in Switzerland, and we had summited. And right before he died, he said, "Hey, if I die before you, I want you to talk about this moment at the funeral. None of this has mattered. It's basically he was like, this is the stuff that matters." And Chris was like, man, Mike was a guy, and all he did was, he worked hard, always had this whole list of shit to do, before he died that just all went went undone. The things that matter in your life, like make sure you have people in your life that you care about because that's the stuff that matters. And I'll never forget that. Like that was like a very formative moment in my life, hearing him kind of just talk so bluntly about it. It's like, you know, yeah, all so we have all these, when you ask me what my biggest accomplishment is, it's like we have all these things that we love, these goals that are like tangible, but it's the relationships we have with people. That's what I think really matters, and that's why Easton matters so much to me. It's really that, so I think that all kind of ties together to like why the Easton project is so important and why my relationships with you and my other friends and my brother and my wife matter to me so much. Because this is all we have, really.
You've told me that story. Yeah, that's a wild story.
I tell a lot of people it.
It's a good story. I mean, I've heard all these stories. Man, I've known you for 20 years. Uh, these are continuing a little bit on the not the morbid, but so everybody that's listening, like Ian and I have known each other for a very long time. We
I,
don't always talk about such morbid things, but it comes up. You know, we do have a lot of that conversation. We also laugh a lot and talk a lot of shit, being East Coast people. But this stuff is stuff that I know Ian. He's helped me appreciate more through conversations. So as a reason I'm asking these questions, and some of them are gonna overlap, but then Ian, you can wave them away. There's a few more, and then we'll go to the closing. Um, if you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anyone, what would you most regret not having told someone? Why haven't you told them yet?
these are really good questions.
Well, I took them from a list of these questions that I always pull from, that I've got from Tyler Cohen.
Yeah. Um, Tyler Cohen. That's a great question. Well, I don't have, and I'm being very candid about this. I don't have anything. Like one thing I really try to do often is tell people I love them. Like I think it's that. Like I really try to do that um, uh, whenever I can. So I don't. I don't think I have anything. I don't. There's nothing that comes to mind that like I'm like some secret I'm dying. I have someone I got to tell. Because I think the people that in my life and who I love and care about, they know it, and I tell them that, and I try not to be sparing with telling them that, So I don't have a really fun answer to that. It's just I really try to tell the people that I love them often, and I always encourage other people to do that. I really it's like we have so many opportunities to tell people in our lives how much we love them, and we waste most of them. So don't do that.
I think there's more to this that maybe Ian's not remembering. So Ian is, I don't know if he's a self-proclaimed introvert, but he's definitely, he's great at connecting with people. He doesn't love parties. Neither do I. It's not our thing. We don't want to be the center of attention. Uh, but something that I always appreciate about Ian is that Ian doesn't shy away from telling people, even strangers, when they're doing good things. Uh, and what I mean by that, like sometimes the most profound acts for me in my life came from strangers. Like somebody said something to me that I just met them that day, or I didn't even meet them. They came in passing and said something, and I was like, whoa. And I remember the color of the paint on the wall. I remember what this person looked like, and I only saw them for 5 seconds or 10 seconds, maybe a minute. And those moments for me actually ended up changing my life because I'm like, oh wow, that person recognized something in me that I didn't see, and maybe that I've heard from people that know me. I ignored it. Ian does that. Like we were at dinner the other day, and he made a point to like this waiter was just great. He was a good waiter. He was a young kid, but he's doing an excellent job in every aspect of the role. And Ian made a point. It's like I'm going to tell him he's doing a good job. Yeah, I'm going to tell him. I'm going to let him know like he's really good at this and how much it matters. And I think those random acts of kindness by like propping people up and seeing something in them and like letting them know you see them is extremely powerful to individuals. And Ian's really good about doing that. And I've learned that from him over the years. And this seems easy, but what often happens is like you recognize it in the person. You say you're going to say something, and then you just don't do it because you're lazy, or it feels awkward, or it feels contrived or forced or whatever. But I think Ian, in those moments, throws caution to the wind and says, "Fuck it." Like that's why he found jujitsu. That's why he got me in there. I don't think I ever would have done it if he didn't make me do it. And I appreciate that about him. So just, I think he's good about pointing things out to those random acts of kindness happen a lot with him. Two more. Your house containing everything you own catches fire. After saving your loved ones and pets, obviously, you have time to safely make a final dash to save one item. What would it be and why? Your computer.
Yeah, probably. It's my, yeah, no, my computer or I guess my guitar, one of the other. But one of those. I don't have anything. I don't have anything that is like a material like, and this is not to sound like, deep or anything. I just don't. I don't have anything that's like a material object that is of like crazy importance to me. yeah, it'd be my pets for sure. Um, my kitty, and then probably
It's
my computer,
cross-eyed cat.
my guitar. That's all I own. That's really, yeah.
Yeah, anything.
Our couch is pretty sweet.
That's a
Really
heavy,
nice couch.
heavy lift.
Pretty
Me too.
stoked
That's
about.
my nicest thing in my house is my couch,
Oh yeah, pretty stoked about that thing.
and it's not insured. I'd be sad to lose my couch for sure. That's interesting. I don't know what I would
Oh
say.
yeah.
I have the same. I have this brooch, this really cheap. My grandmother was poor as fuck, raised by her parents. Same thing. No parents at the age of 9, raised in the Great Depression. Poor as hell. So, but there's this brooch it's this golden Christmas tree, and it's probably made of tin, and it's worth like 2 cents. Um, but that's probably what I would. Not that you asked, but that's probably what I would take because everything else can burn down. My kids make me new things
Oh,
every day.
but
So
that's cool to know. Like that's cool though. Like that's having something that's like cool that there's like a like history, like an heirloom. I don't have anything like that. No heirlooms.
I mean, it's
It's
cheap.
just
It's
yeah,
breaking left and right.
very
So delicate.
yeah. Well, still cool.
Yeah. Um. All right. This is the one I ask everybody. When you are 65 years old, what does the dinner table look like for you in your ideal future? Who is there? Where are you? Any details you want to add?
Um, well, I'll do two scenarios, right? There's one where it's just yeah, my obviously me and my wife, and things are just as they are today. Like in the sense that like we're just as happy with each other's presence and enjoying it and everything else. And then, obviously, like, uh, if it's like a Thanksgiving dinner and I'm meeting with friends, I want you there. I want your family. Um, your kids will be older. They want like them there. My yeah, my brother and Jamie and just yeah, if it was like a big gathering, it'd be all my friends, it'd be all the GMs. Who when I say that like I love all of them and I consider them really close friends, I mean it. So I don't know. It'd be the people. What's funny, and this is the thing, it's like I feel, yeah, I feel very fortunate that I have all the that I have the friends that I do, and the relationship I have with my wife, and so it'd be all those people. I
Badass.
don't have kids.
Where will
I
you
don't I
be?
don't have kids, and maybe this in this house. No, I where will I be? I don't know. I don't know. Probably in Colorado. Well, I don't know. I haven't thought enough about that. Um, I don't know. I have to think about it. That I don't want to answer that one right away because I don't have anything I say will be me just not having put adequate thought into it. But um, like one of the things I think about, this is like a good place to kind of talk about it. It's like I don't have kids, and one of the things that you know, Ashley and I like what you grapple with is what are you missing out on? Like there is that thought, and it's like one of the things that kind of helps me move more comfortably through the world is this understanding that every decision you make, right, you're making a decision not to do an infinite amount of other things. And so because I think it's very easy to live life in a way where it's like you make a decision then regret the decision, what would have been if I had done the opposite. It's the grass is greener problem, and it's prevalent and persistent in everybody's life, and it just helps me to know that like if we have kids, we will be, like what we'd be missing out on something else right now, because I know if we had kids, because I know for you, Mike, and it's been like, man, it's been amazing watching you be a dad. Because like I always say that you're really one of the best dads I've ever seen. And I think that I get to live in some weird ways vicariously through it. Like I watch you raise your kids, and and I know that they're the most important thing in your life. You know what I mean? And I know that if I had kids, it would be the most important thing in mine. So I get that I don't get it, but um, I hope that when I'm 65, and it's me and at the dinner table with Ashley, we have our dogs, and that we're both feeling really fulfilled. Because of course there's the fear that maybe we're missing out on not on kids, but I think again, it's like every decision you make, the reason FOMO doesn't make sense is because you make the decisions you make, and you if you close off doors to all the other, every time you make one decision, all the doors shut on the other decisions, and so just be happy with the door you've opened. And that's kind of how I look at however it is when I'm 65. I hope I have the same mindset. I hope I can be 65 and feel grateful for the decisions I've made and be happy where I am.
What are your favorite books and what are you currently reading?
Oh my, I have a lot of favorite books. Well, I read a lot of different things. Right lately I've been into historical. I like historical fiction. I'm reading, and then I've been reading some history. Uh, I'm reading a book. I'm just finishing a book that I've actually read before. It's called A Thousand Splendid Suns. It was great. It's the same author who wrote The Kite Runner.
Dude, that book
I
I
thought
read
that,
both those.
and I'm really,
I read those both in Brazil. That such two of the most
oh,
beautiful fiction books ever written.
yeah, oh yeah, you like that one?
Oh yeah, dude, they're
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah, I think they're both really, really good. Yeah, I love both of those books, and I'm actually finishing A Thousand Splendid Suns right now, and I'm really enjoying it. The other book I'm reading, it's a book about the Holocaust. It's called Unfinished History, and it's very interesting. It's really, really worth reading. I don't know if we can link to both of those books in the podcast, um, but then I obviously I read a lot of a lot of I don't want to know if self-help books is the right word, but I read a lot of self-help books. I'm always reading those. I think my favorite of recent is probably, and because I've read many since, but I read this about maybe a year and a half ago. I read The Wisdom of the Bullfrog. I love that book.
Adam McCraven is the man.
That one really what, yeah, like that book was so great. I loved it. But I'm reading I guess, and this is not really a self-help book, but it's in the sort of genre. I'm reading a book by Cass Sunstein called Sludge. And it's basically just about how to, and there's so many books about this, but it's about how to streamline information a little bit more easily. Um, Another book that I really liked is called Time Management for Mortals. And that book is, the reason I bring that one up is I probably read that a few years ago, but I bring that one up because it's sort of what put me at peace a little bit more with making decisions in life and just understanding that we all have a finite amount of time, and with every decision you make, you're closing the doors to others. That was from that book that I really liked. So, but yeah, the book I'm reading right now is called Sludge.
All right, I appreciate you sharing those. We will link them for sure. What is your favorite Disney movie?
Ooh, right now it's Soul.
Cool.
Or I guess that's Pixar, but but Soul. I love
Disney
Soul.
owns,
Like it just everything that what's that?
Disney owns Pixar, so
Yeah. Like Soul, everything that we're kind of talking about, like Soul really touches on. I think it's the most philosophical Disney movie. And I think kids can love it, but it's definitely, it's an important movie in my opinion. I loved it so much. I watch it a lot.
I know a lot. Ian watches almost as many Disney movies, maybe more than me and my kids, and we love Disney movies, but just kind of funny.
Yeah,
But
we
Ian doesn't have any
watch a
kids.
lot of them. It's a little weird. It's strange when you walk in on Sunday morning and my wife and I are watching Beauty and the Beast for the 7,000th time. That
Yeah,
happens.
we do it too.
I like that movie too.
I love Disney movies.
It's comfort.
It's comfort, and there's a reason they're everlasting. There's a lot to them, and there's story. There's not soul, but they're fairy tales from thousands of years ago. So I don't know. It's just there's a lot to it. All right, final question. You can't sugarcoat this, and you can't pass it off. It's going to be hard. You got to be a dick because that's really your mo. Any feedback for me, and how can we as a company do better or improve?
Any feedback for you? I have to think about it. so, first of all, as far as a company is how can we improve? I think we're always working on it. You know what I mean? I think it's always um, I think what happens is, we grow and we get bigger, and then there's growing pains that are associated with that. I think they're unavoidable. We're all learning on the fly in many ways. But I don't really have anything, and I'm trying to be granular here, but I can't think of one way we really need to improve. But I think that it's just continuing to be adaptable. Like, so you made, like, and I think this was a really good addition to our core values, the being adaptable. um I think it's that. It's like we live in a dynamic world where things are changing. We've been through a lot in the past 4 years, like a lot of people have. And it's just always being willing to adapt, never being uh stuck on our own, or on one way of doing things. If we find a better way, that not having an emotional attachment to our processes, and being, willing to change and pivot if we need to. Um, I also think that what we talked about earlier, I think returning to, I do think we need to return to um, a little bit. We've been very inclusive, which is awesome, and we would never want that to change, but pushing people a little bit more, maybe, right? To make themselves uncomfortable. Maybe we need to be pushing people to make themselves uncomfortable more, and not just being as sort of, someone's like, oh, I'm not going to compete this week because, I'm, whatever, whatever the reason is, reason X, right? It's like, no, 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 like, you should put, like, maybe we need to apply a little bit more pressure to get people out of their comfort zones. Um, so maybe, I don't know. Those are some examples. Feedback for you? No, man. I think it's no. Look, man. Like, I've said this a lot. You have a temper. You know what I mean? And one of the things, and this isn't gonna be me trying to soft pedal it, but I'm just gonna speak honestly about how I feel about it. You have a temper, and it's and I know, and this is no mystery, and it's real. And there are people out in the world who pretend to have a temper, right? There's a difference, right? There are people out there who pretend to be um, virulent, right? And virulent's kind of the wrong word. And I was searching for this word earlier when I was thinking about my dad. It's like, it can be volatile, right? It's like, you can lose your temper quickly. But there are people out there who pretend to do it because it's like a show, and you don't. And I've known you for a very long time, and one of the things that, so it's like, yeah, you can always continue to work on that, right? But the other side of it, man, is that, like, you always, every time you've lost it, and you've lost it with me, right? And you always apologize for it, and like, I'll tell a recent story. You asked me to be honest. This is a great recent story. I don't know the exact situation, but some dude, Mike was like standing in a parking lot, and some dude started approaching Mike with a little bit too much heat, right? I don't know what the reason was. Again, you maybe can clarify, but it was the wrong time, and it hit Mike the wrong way, and Mike lost his temper. Now, he didn't do anything to the guy, but he scared him, right? Which you can have the potential to do, right? And for the next 24 hours, all we heard about was how bad Mike felt. And then it's all this guy heard about, because Mike actually found where the guy worked, bought the guy cupcakes and donuts and whatever else, and it was like this endless, like, just regret for having lost his temper. And so, yeah, man, it's like, this is, if it's anything, I guess it's that, you're an emotional guy, right? And that's part of why I love you. You can, of course, work on continuing to manage it. But I know, but because of, and again, this is not I'm not trying to give like a pass, but there's something about when someone has a genuine moment, and then they apologize for it. I don't know. It's just part of, it's like my ability to miss fine details consistently. Um, you know what I mean? Like, I think there's a charm in it, or at least I tell myself that. Maybe not, right? But
Uh,
yeah, I guess it's that, man. you have a temper. You can, there are times where I can tell it's like right underneath the explosion, you know what I mean? And you're venting, you know, but um, we all have our things, I guess. So I don't really like publicly like giving you feedback, but like this is the same feedback I've always given you, and I don't, and you're on it, man. So it's not like you're like, really, wow, this is blindsiding me. You know this, you know what I mean? So that's what I would say.
I'm reading a really good book right now called Letting Go, and it's been super helpful as far as thinking about how we.
Great book, read it,
Did you? Yeah,
loved
it's
it. Yep.
really about like the pieces that how they propagate in our actions, and like there's escapism, anger, and then like another one. But it's the anger is really just a projection often, when I think about what it is that creates it. Of Anyway, it's been super helpful. We'll see how it sticks. Man, thank you so much for your time, Ian. Everybody, that was a really long podcast. I think double the length of the ones we usually do, but I thought it'd be good. You can always listen to them fast on Spotify or Apple, and there's different sections too that I think are super useful. Anyway, Ian, thanks for your time.
Yeah.
That was a lot of fun, and yeah, I don't have anything else. That was phenomenal.
I apologize for my long-windedness. I know that it's getting worse as I get older. Yeah, and I think I also kind of speak slowly, so obviously speed it up. But no, thank you, Mikey. And I really, it's funny we don't do this very often, so it was nice to talk to you, and I appreciate you and everybody who listens.